Hi, I'm Jim, and I want to show you today a very special bike, one of my favorite bikes. It's an 1886 Victor Light Roadster. This type of bike is called a high wheel. In England they called it a penny farthing. In America it was called the ordinary because it was such a common bicycle that everybody was riding at the time. From about 1875, 77, around there, to about 1890, this was the most popular bike in the world. It's a very strange, unusual bike today. You don't see them very often. Most of them are in museums. The bike has a huge front wheel, as you can see, and another nickname for this bike was, some people would just call it the wheel because it had such a large front wheel. People always wonder, why did the wheel get so big? And it's because in the 1870s, 1860s, everybody was getting around on horses or in buggies, horses and buggies. So it wasn't unusual or strange for them to think of sitting high up. They were used to sitting high up when they traveled around. And this bike put them high for another reason. They realized they had bikes before they came out with the high wheel bike that had more evenly sized wheels. But because these bikes are direct drive, there's no gearing. You could only go so far and so fast with a little wheel. So they realized if they went to a bigger and bigger wheel, they could travel further with each pedal stroke. So the wheel got bigger and bigger and bigger. This wheel is actually a 56-inch wheel. You can see I'm almost 6 feet tall. And the wheel is just slightly shorter than I am. Now if I was a lot taller, I would have used a bigger wheel. And if I was just a child starting out, they had bikes that wheels were much smaller for the kids. So that's how you size the bike. Now we use different frame sizes, but back then they used different wheel sizes. So this is a direct drive bike, the original Fixie. And this is actually an original antique bicycle. This bike was made in Chicopee, Massachusetts by the Victor Bicycle Company. And it was made in 1886, which is over 130 years ago. It's one of the nicest riding bikes I own, actually. The big wheel goes right across holes because it's such a large diameter. We have two Niner mountain bikes now with big fat tires and big wheels that roll over bumps. They work fantastic. This works even better. And back in the 1880s, most of the roads were not paved, they were dirt. So it was important to have a bike that rode really nice like that. You look at the seat and you look at the handlebars, it looks pretty much like a horse saddle. You see the flaps that hang down on the seat? They served a purpose. When you were riding on these dirt roads, you'd pick up mud, all kinds of nasty stuff that was on the roads at the time. And these flaps would act as a buffer to knock the stuff off so it didn't ruin your trousers when you were riding the bike. You can see that the hand grips look like, they call them spade grips. And the spade grips was one type. There were also pear grips. There are a lot of companies in the 10 years that these bikes were super popular, and they all had different designs, but the bikes were pretty similar in terms of how they worked. You had a fixed gear, so you had to keep pedaling. You can't stop pedaling. If you stop pedaling, the pedals keep going. So you pedal forward, and then when you come to a hill, a steep downhill, you hold back on the pedals. You also had a brake. This is the type of brake that they used, a friction brake. We call it a spoon brake. And you just squeeze the handle here, and this little spoon comes down and rubs against the tire, and that's what slows you down. Most of your slowing down is done by holding back on the pedals. These brakes could get red hot on a long downhill. They don't stop very well. So most people, if you get going past about 15 miles an hour, what you do is you get off the bike and walk down the hill. An advanced rider, a skilled rider, back in the day they were way more skilled than we are, they would take their legs and put them up on top of the handlebars. the pedals would be spinning like crazy, their feet would be up in front, and they would coast downhill at high speeds like that. The problem with keeping your feet on the pedals is that your legs would then be trapped underneath the handlebars. At the end of this video, I have some footage of me riding the bike where you'll see me get on the bike, get off the bike, and you'll see me ride around in circles. So wait for that, and you'll see what it's like to ride the bike. The bikes were super popular for about 10 years, and then they went out of favor because they were pretty dangerous. In the 10 years that these bikes were super popular, they had roughly 1,000 people died in accidents on these bikes. And the way they died was an accident called a header. And you could see that I'm wearing a typical helmet of the time. Even today when we ride these bikes, I'm a member of the antique bicycle club called the Wheelmen, and we celebrate the history of antique bicycles, especially high-wheelers. And we get together and everybody dresses up in original costumes. And this is an original pith helmet, the type of helmet that we would have worn in the 1880s in Northern California when we went out for a ride. It was very militaristic. You know, we came from the Civil War had happened. Everybody was used to being in uniforms. And when we went out on rides in our bikes, there would be a guy in front, a captain. He had a bugle, a special bugle that you could carry in a pouch on a bicycle. And he would play bugle calls, just like in the Civil War, and marching formations. And people would ride the bikes in almost like a parade formation. But this is the type of a hat we wore in Northern California. In other places they wore caps, but this actually is a type of helmet. It wouldn't provide much protection, but it keeps the sun out of your eyes. And if you did fall off, you hoped that you could avoid what they called a header in America. In England they called it an imperial crowner. What would happen is you're sitting so close to the tip over point on the bicycle that the bike wants to do this. All it takes for the bike to flip forward is to hit a rock or a root or a rut. And if it happens quick, and you go straight forward. If your feet are still on the pedals, your knees are trapped under the handlebars, which means that when you hit the ground, if you can get your hands down, you probably break your wrists. If you can't get your hands down, you hit your head, and that was what the header was all about. And if you hit your head, if you were unlucky, you might get killed in the accident. So pretty quickly, in the late 1880s, early 1890s, they were already, engineers and bicycle makers were already working on what they called the safety bicycle, which was the next type of bicycle that came after this. And after that, these bicycles pretty much went away. But they're wonderful to ride. They're hard to get on. That's one of the challenges. To get on this bike, there's a small peg on the back. And what you do is you put your foot on the peg and you push until you get up to speed, almost like a scooter, and then you boost yourself up into the seat once you're rolling down the road. And to get off, you climb down the back the same way excuse me, the same way you got up. In the heyday of the bikes, the riders were super athletic, so a lot of them would take the pegs off because it wasn't manly to have to use a peg to get on your bike. And they could vault on the saddle just like you could jump on the back of a horse, and they could get off excuse me, they could get off the same way. The technology behind the bikes was super advanced. Even though it was 1880s, this was about a $140 bicycle back then, which was about 6 months of a workman's salary. And the quality of the construction is spectacular. It's every bit as good, maybe better, than what we have today. Some of the things that they have on this bike are hard to explain. You can show them to engineers and frame builders and they don't understand how they did it. If you look at the frame is called the backbone, and if you look at it, it starts here at one diameter and then very gently tapers all the way to the top to a different diameter. The seat will come right off, so you could take it off to protect it on a rainy day. You could see the magnificent spring that the seat sits on, and you could see that it's a big piece of leather. That's all it is. Now, I restored this bike. It was all original. It had most of the original parts, but there were a few things that were needed. One was the seat, which was missing. So I made a seat out of a piece of leather, which is a facsimile of what was originally on there. But you can see the backbone. You can also see the interesting steering mechanism. This piece continues, and inside here, if you could take this all apart, you'd see that there's a pointed end here and a pointed end here. There's no bearings. And by adjusting this nut, you can fine-tune the bearing adjustment just like you do on the headset of a bicycle today, so there's no play between the backbone and the front fork. I'm going to put the seat back on. The other reason you would take the seat off, it's pretty hard to steal a bike without a seat. And they were worried about bike theft in the 1880s, just like we are today. So the backbone is incredible the way it's shaped, and the fork is equally incredible. The fork has hollow blades, and if you look at them, they're beautifully sharp on both edges. Very arrow, although they weren't thinking about that. It was mostly for strength. But if you look, they taper down and get narrower and narrower and narrower to the ends where the bearings are attached that the wheel spins on. These are the famous Victor Aeolus bearings, which can be finely adjusted with this cog here, which is held in place by this lock pin. The wheel on this bike is pretty magnificent. It actually has what appears to be 80 spokes, but if you look at each spoke and you follow it down from the rim to the hub, you'll see that each spoke is actually 2 spokes. Just one wire that comes down, bends at the hub, and goes back out the other end. So every spoke is a big giant V. And if you look closely, the spokes are tied and soldered at the crosses, which is something some fine wheel builders actually do today to strengthen wheels, and they were doing it already in the 1880s when these bikes were built. I had to rebuild this wheel. There was an issue with the hub I had to have repaired, and it took me over 2 weeks to get the spokes out, put them back in the right way, and rebuild the wheel. One of the hardest wheels I ever built, and one of the most satisfying. So that's a lot about the bike. I think it's time we took it for a ride. Riding a high wheel, your head is about 9 feet above the ground, so you tower over the terrain and can see forever. There's no chain or gears too, so the bike rolls along whisper quiet. The almost 5-foot high front wheel spans holes and ruts for a nice smooth ride, and the solid rubber tires can't go flat or get ruined by a piece of glass or rock. While they're heavier than modern bikes, this Victor weighs 58 pounds. High wheels move right along. On a flat 10-mile loop course in Connecticut, I was able to ride a Century 100 miles in 7 hours. It was this ability to cover long distances that made the high wheel an overnight sensation in the 1800s. For the first time, a person could travel further in a day than on the back of a horse, and by a lot. Plus, you didn't have to feed a bike, it didn't get hot and sweaty, and it didn't ever tire out. On your wheel, you could visit towns far away you'd never been to before, or keep going and see the world, like Thomas Stevens, who circled the globe from Oakland, California to Japan on his. By giving people the freedom to travel whenever and wherever they wanted in comfort and style, the amazing high-wheel bicycle gets credit for the whole concept of personal transportation we enjoy today. I hope you liked this video, and thanks for watching. In the description below, I put some links for learning more about high wheels. Please help support my channel by subscribing.